book discussion, The Art of Doing Science and Engineering by Richard Hamming. I think the key idea of the book is that you can engineer your own success by thinking the right way. So success is not random. Luck favors the prepared. That's a quote that very often goes through the book. I think it's a quote from Pascale. So Richard Hamming he's an old school man. He believes in a can-do attitude towards life. A very refreshing, I think, second half of the 20th century, early second half of the 20th century attitude. I think it reflects America after the Second World War, a winning society, a society of can-do men who created great things, terrifying things sometimes. He was part of the Manhattan Project, so he clearly was part of a very terrifying group of people who created something unbelievable, the atomic bomb. So I think that definitely reflects, and sometimes reading this book, and I think about where we are today in our society, using Peter Thiel's quadrant, we're sort of optimistic without a future or something like that. We have 40 trillion in debt as a country. Most of our jobs are, most people waste their careers in purposeless jobs, paper pushing jobs like banking, consulting, insurance, politics, and very few people actually want to really do great things, think about big, difficult problems and solve them. Now, there is a renaissance of that. We have American Dynamism by Andreessen Horowitz, which reflects a certain attitude towards technology and defense. We have Elon Musk and his companies. We have others that copy Elon Musk, or startups that are spin-offs from SpaceX and Tesla that are reflecting this attitude of solving difficult problems, thinking big, thinking at scale. And even though a lot of life is luck, of course, but again, luck favors the prepared. So prepare yourself, be ready when it strikes, sort of like a Navy SEAL. Train every day as hard as you can, and then act when you need to act. You don't need to act from 9 to 5. Acting and doing things and working is not a linear thing. The productivity of your work is not proportional to the time scale. It is proportional to the time you put in, but not to like the actual execution of things, because sometimes it just has to happen. It has to be ready, and then you can execute. But what you can do on a time scale is prepare yourself. You can work on hard things. You can create habits. One of the big messages of the book is that you're an animal of your habits. Now, this book was written or conceived, decades ago. So some of his thoughts and wisdom is maybe, it might be like more common today. But he wrote with 2020 as a future date. He would say things like, what kind of computers we have in 2020. So clearly he was thinking of the future, a future that now is the present. And that in itself is actually fascinating. And I've mentioned that in one of the book discussions already. To read a book by somebody who's relevant. Clearly he was at Bell Labs. He created some really important contributions for computer science and mathematics. So for somebody like that to have an insight into where we're going to be today is fascinating on its own. And I wonder how Hamming would look at somebody like Tesla or somebody like the Gen AI revolution that we're witnessing right now, how he would look at it. But one of the interesting things that he talks about is inverting the problem. So inverting the problem means he, for example, used computers to do math, and computers were really bad at programming, so they weren't able to solve certain math equations. So then instead of trying to cut corners, he made the computers actually become programmers. Like he solved the problem of computer programming, and therefore he solved this problem. So a typical problem inversion would be let's say if Tesla has a problem with edge cases, then instead of just putting more and more data at the models, maybe you should just look for the edge cases, for example, for simulation, and create them. So to invert the problem and then create a whole new industry, let's say world models, and things like that. So some of his ideas are definitely being implemented. You can see that people read his book or books. He's been very influential. I'm pretty sure people at universities, particularly the woke universities, probably don't like him because he's a man. He's a real man, 20th century man. He doesn't mince words. There are good people, there are bad people. There's meritocracy. There's, he has one of his chapters. He said, you get what you measure. Very, very important chapters. There's a lot of important insight. You get what you measure, for example, which is obviously the measuring itself, the benchmarks, to use computer science lingo. The benchmarks are kind of not just there to help us, to guide us through the maze of science and research. The benchmarks also determine where we're going. And I think one of the most famous concepts of that was when Clayton Christensen spoke about the kinds of measurements we use on Wall Street, return on equity, return on investment. You get what you measure, right? If you do that consistently, you're going to get incrementalism. I don't want to elaborate now more on why that's the case, but you will have incrementalism if you continuously want to increase return on equity and return on investment and things like that, because you're going to minimize investment and increase returns, and the best way you can do that is always, at least in the short run, through incrementalism. But there's a lot of interesting tidbits here that Hamming. I think really the most important key takeaway for me is think big, and thinking big and self-confidence are muscles. You can train yourself to think big. You can train yourself to think about difficult problems. You can train yourself to solve difficult problems. Like all of these types of things are trainable. You can create habits. For example, he does the Friday afternoon thinking about difficult problems type habit, which Google, for example, had with that 20% free time. So people do these kinds of things, and some of them are useful, some of them are not useful. I think one of his other important quotes in the book is that if you learn from others, you can. It's very good for employees and followers, but if you want to be a leader, you have to learn for yourself, and that's absolutely key. So whenever he's saying, let's say, having making it a habit to think big, those are it works for him. Maybe it doesn't work necessarily for you, or in your particular case. Let's say in our case, I think we have some of those habits. Like we try to focus on the big picture and really have a North Star, have a purpose in what we do, and then we kind of derive from there what we need to do on a daily basis, or which conference to go to, or which paper to read, or which person to interview, or where to invest and where not to invest. Those are, the answers to those questions. They come through the progress towards that North Star that we have, the vision. And he's very clear about that. The accuracy of the vision is not even that important. What's important is to have a vision, which reminds me of Pascal's wager. In Pascal's case, it was about believing in God, which was fine. You can just replace believing in God and believing in X, having a vision, and then it's just worth believing in something. Even if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. You spend your life believing in something, but what if you're wrong the other way? What if you don't believe in something and it turns out that life is all about believing in something? You don't know. I'm a bit older now. I know that it's worth believing in something. I know that it's worth to have purpose. And I also have a teenage son, and I can see that he sometimes, feels like I'm just sort of an intellectual fart, to use his words. Who cares about, problem solving and vision, blah, blah, blah. I just need a job. I need to make money. I need to be dependent on you, stupid parents. That's kind of where, I need a girlfriend. I need to get laid. I want to party and things like that. That's what he is mainly focused on, and not necessarily having a vision. So there's this book is written for my son, though it's not written for me. It's written for a young engineer, perfect for my son, who is a freshman engineering student at Berkeley. So he is exactly in that role where, okay, what exactly am I doing? Why am I doing this? So I think I have my, this is not me, this is not from the book. I think there are three important problems in the world right now. One is energy, one is transport, and one is defense. And you want to be in one of those three areas. And you want to solve difficult technology problems that help advance those areas. So in terms of transport, it's autonomous transport. In defense, it's technological deterrence, and in energy, it's energy is always the same, lower cost and more scale and lower cost. So those are the kinds of big picture thoughts that I think help guide a young person towards an excellence, a career of excellence, and that's the idea of the book. So very inspiring. I think Hamming is an unapologetic, excellence-driving teacher. Another important quote from the book is that universities should be obsessed with the future of the students and not the past of the professors. And that's a huge quote that I can only second. And unfortunately, it's exactly the latter that is happening in most of our institutions. And that has to do with the fact that our institutions are, there's a misalignment of what they're actually supposed to be doing and what they're actually doing, even though they're financed by public money, all of the universities, even the private ones. So it's really sad. And I mean, we're having these conversations now with my son about physics, and I just want to use physics to illustrate Hamming's point. I think physics has very, very important problems to solve. It's the most important science by far. It's the purpose of mathematics. The purpose of mathematics is actually to formulate what physicists discover and to translate those discoveries in actionable, activities, which we call engineering. But I think physics has derailed completely. Billions and billions of dollars are being invested in physics, and very little to show for it. Maybe Higgs bosons and telescopes and things like that. But I think a very large percentage of physics students, particularly on the East Coast, end up working on Wall Street as speculators, and that's just terrible. I mean, I don't even know how else to describe that. It's a bit less here on the West Coast because we have more industries to carry these engineers into more purposeful work, starting with Elon Musk and his companies, and then the Silicon Valley and the adjacent companies, Silicon Valley, the defense industry in LA, and also here in the Bay Area now there's more and more energy and defense, and like Silicon Valley is penetrating those types of industries, and it's not always great. I think not everything Silicon Valley does is laudable by any means. There's unfortunately also a lot of staticism and vanity and arrogance infiltrating maybe as an overlap from Wall Street into Silicon Valley. But nevertheless, we still have an entrepreneurial culture here. We have a culture of building things. We have a culture of solving difficult problems, something that, in my opinion, has been completely lost on the East Coast and also in Europe. It is also prevalent, of course, in China. And that's why we are in competition with China. So having said that, I think, again, Hamming's ideas and also criticisms are very, very timely. I think we're at a crossroads now as a society, as a civilization, where we want to either continue with the pursuit of liberty and happiness, or we're going to give it up to China, which has a different idea of how our society should be organized. It might be maybe the better one. If we lose in the economic realm, we're also going to lose on the military realm, and the world's gonna look differently. We already have creeping socialism all over Europe. We have even here in the U.S., California is a big, if socialism is a cancer, we're definitely cancerous here. But we're also having, our immune system is still pretty strong, so we should be able to weather the storm. Let's leave it at that. Now, To summarize, I think Richard Hemming's book, The Art of Doing Science and Engineering, it's a phenomenal read. I highly recommend it to particularly to STEM students in the first maybe 2-3 years, but anybody, I mean, even grad students, PhDs. There's some technical detail that where he lost me, like about digital filters and things like that. But that's that's his game. I guess he wanted to visit something that he is famous for, and that's okay. But I think some of the more interesting, sort of towards the end of the book, when he talks about simulation and talks about systems engineering, very important systems engineering, where you have to think about the system and not the individual components. And actually, often optimizing individual components can lead to to failure of the system. Or, for example, that if you design a system as such that you have let's say you build you design it at spec so it can be I guess he said if you optimize for spec, you run the risk of failing if you go over spec. So what you need to do is you have to have more of a flexible system where even if you overdo the spec, it has to sort of gently reduce its reliability, but not all of a sudden just collapse, things like that. Now, I think for us here at Arch Capital Partners, the purpose of this whole exercise, reading books and all that, is, of course, we've said that many times, it's not just a pastime. This is what we do. It's yoga for the mind. It's you learn how to learn. I mean, this is actually the subtitle of the book. So learning how to learn means humility. It means question yourself. It means try to overcome some of the cognitive biases like overconfidence and particularly overconfidence is a big problem in investing. So you have the Rorschach test, which I've actually put an X quote out after I read about it in the book. The Rorschach test, which is the idea that when we interpret things, we often interpret our own imagination, so we don't actually interpret reality. And I think the stock market, in the short run, is a Rorschach test for almost everybody. In the long run, it's a very good, I think, proxy for intelligence, because all those imaginations and all those fake ideas and weird thoughts and whatnot comes through in the short run. When you listen to CNBC or Bloomberg and Wall Street analysts, it really sounds like monkeys with a brain, monkeys with a little bit more of a brain, maybe. But then when you actually, over the long run, it's definitely, it's just simply the smartest people make the most money. I would say that's probably what's going on. So again, in summary, I think we are at a point as a society where I think we have to decide for ourselves where we want to be. Do we want to be in a sort of Richard Hemming world of excellence and pursuit of excellence and pursuit of solve hard problems, do the work, create the habits? That's really, really important. It's the same like with, anyway, let me finish this thought. So do we want to be there, or do we want to be in this woke infested society of relativistic nightmare, Foucault, Derrida type stuff? Like clearly we don't. We want to be competitive. We want to think big. We want our young people to strive for excellence. We need to find a way to keep our young people from working for consulting firms and banks and get them back into real companies, real engineering problems. And if you're not an engineer, it's fine. You can work in finance, you can be in marketing. There's lots of problems to be solved in the real world. We need to do that. And I think the best way to do that is to inspire kids and give them a book like this, but also give them some feedback. And the last thing I want to say, meaning, give them some positive feedback. So if they work towards these types of difficult problems, give them feedback, give them jobs, pay them, inspire them, like things like that. Last thing I want to say, I've been criticizing academia for a long time now. I think I've been, on the record, off the record, saying many times that the main job of academia is to teach. That is the number one job. And if you just go to any university, Berkeley, Stanford, and I don't think any professor would, if you just said, what's your job? My job's to research, Nobel Prize. The accolades are, if you think about the future of your students, you're not going to get rewarded. Even though they claim they are, actually, but you're not. So that's a big flaw. I think it has to do with government involvement and things like that. That's beyond this episode. I think this episode is discussing the book. The book is great. It inspires me to think about how to position myself and how to create my own habits and my muscle to solve big problems. Thank you.